today. Good morning. I am Bethany Steinken. I'm the Program Support Coordinator for the Montana After School Alliance. And I have been working on collecting a lot of these questions. I've talked to a lot of you lately, either on the phone or in emails, because there are a lot of questions around this. This is a pretty unique opportunity, really, where the state of Montana was given, well, all of the states were given these coronavirus relief funds, and then having to decide how to get them out to folks and get that turnaround really fast. And it's a bigger chunk of money than a lot of our programs are used to dealing with. It's a bigger chunk of money really than the state is probably used to dealing with. So again, thank you all for your patience as we all just kind of work through this together, trying to figure out the best way to serve the needs of the families in Montana. Joining me on the call today are my colleagues at the Montana After School Alliance, Lori Bishop, our director, and Katie Johnson is our AmeriCorps Vista volunteer. So they're going to be helping me answer some questions, keep track of questions as we go through this call today. I'm also going to try really hard. I watched the recording of the last call we did, and I have a little ADD with my cursor, I noticed, so I'm going to try really hard to not do that. We'll see how that goes. So just for those of you that maybe don't know about us, we are the Montana After School Alliance, and we are supporting and advocating for quality after school programs, out of school time programs before and after school in the summer. And right now, even what we would typically call the school day, there's a lot of programs that are stepping up to the challenge and providing a space for kids to be during what would typically be school hours. So our vision is that all Montana youth will have access to enriching after school activities in a healthy environment. And that's what you guys right now are helping to provide, thanks at least in part to this funding. And a quick note, MTIA is not the administrator of this funding. The grant is part of the larger coronavirus relief funds like I mentioned earlier. So those were designated by Congress through the CARES Act at the federal level. So MTIA is here to provide assistance and answer some questions, but we have no control over it. You're not sending any reports to us. We're not going to be coming back and checking in after you've spent your funding. We're just sort of supporting programs through this, which is our role any time of year, anything, as we are a support organization. The actual source of the funding at the state level is through the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services, and they are administering this childcare grant as well as all the other CRF grants. The food bank and food pantry assistance, social services, all of those grants are administered by DPHHS. So today we're going to talk a little bit about eligible and ineligible expenses, where to find those, some other resources for this grant. We'll talk a little bit, not a whole lot about reporting, and then we'll take your questions. So where you can find some of those eligible and ineligible expenses are listed here. I was in a call, I think last week, and somebody referred to your grant contract as your best friend. And I think that's a really great way to pose that, because you should be reading your contract, and that's going to have a lot of the information in it that what you can and cannot spend your funds on, and different ways that you need to use your funding. And then there's also all of the different frequently asked questions that I'm going to show you some of those a little bit later. But the federal coronavirus relief funds frequently asked questions don't just cover the child care, they cover all of those CRF funds. And that's one place to find some things that you can and can't spend money on. The DPHHS has school-age childcare specific questions and answers about this grant, and we do as well. And you can find all of those on our website, which I will take you to here in just a minute to show you what that looks like and how to get there. So for those of you that already turned in an interim report, these are how they asked you to report in these kind of different expense buckets. Payroll is one. This grant is unique in that it has the offsetting of tuition and fees as an expense. Equipment, anything over $5,000, and supplies is anything for your program less than $5,000. And then there's some other allowable expenses, utilities, rent, professional development, those kinds of things. But some big no-nos are you cannot prepay any expenses in 2021, and you cannot sub-grant funds. So you can't give these funds back out to others. And then this is something else that's really important for your accounting. Just make sure that any expenses that you have are not overlapping with other state and federal CARES Act funding or any other funding that you have. So I know a lot of after-school programs might have a 21st century grant. Basically, what this means is there's no double dipping. If you already used, say, the paycheck or payroll protection program to pay your payroll and rent and utilities in June and July, and you now realize that you have extra funds and you want to be able to go back and spend those funds on things that happened before, prior to, or sorry, back until March 1st is when you can spend funds for this grant. You can't, if you've already spent your payroll funds on June and July's payroll, you can't also like charge that to this grant. You can only pay for each expense one time with one source of funding. And then as you are, any questions that come up as far as how should I spend this money? Is this going to be an allowable expense? I just really want you to use this framework of this primary intention of these funds is to provide free and reduced cost care and to make sure that your staff are paid. Those are the two big things that this money, they really wanted you to use it for. And also within the framework of mitigating the effects of COVID in your programs. So that's just, think about is this something that's helping provide free or low cost childcare? Am I able to stay open and keep my staff paid? And all of these expenses specifically mitigating COVID. Excuse me. So this is how we get to our frequently asked questions, which I am going to show you now. Oops, I'm going to show you everything. Here we are. So here, this is our website, the Montana After School or MTAfterschoolAlliance.org. And you have a lot of awesome resources here. But how you find the resources specific to this funding is over here on our resources tab. And then you're going to go down to the COVID-19 guidance. And there's a lot of different awesome guidance around COVID-19 that you could find some really helpful information. And then if you come down to about—
Sorry, wait, hold on a second.
Middle of the
Listening to this, and then
if you can,
I'm like, that's not—
Lucy, if you can mute yourself, or maybe it wasn't Lucy, sorry, somebody is unmuted. If you can just be sure to mute yourself when you enter the room, and then we'll make sure to have a time for everybody to chat a little bit later. But down here on the middle of our page is the Funding and CARES Act for out of school time. Click on that, and here you will find a wealth of resources. So you can see this, there's an option to register for the call that you're on right now. This call last week with the Anderson-Zermulin talked about a single audit and what that might entail if you received more than $750,000 in federal funding this year. That may trigger a single audit for you. There's some resources here. I can't register for it anymore because it already happened, but we have some good news on that front. There is the the recording of our last call and then also the PowerPoint slides that I presented, they're going to look pretty similar to the ones you're seeing today. But that'll have some additional information in there if you need it. And then here is the really important piece, I think. These are frequently asked questions. These are questions that we're getting a lot. And if we don't have the answers, we're seeking out the answers and then posting them on this document. So in here you can see we updated it last week with some new questions. The newer questions are at the top. If we get more questions in and more answers, we'll have a new updated date up here. And then again, put the new questions at the top so you can see all of the different questions that you have. Hopefully will be answered here. This is one of the first places to look if you have a question, because there's a lot of really good information in here. And as you can see, there's a lot of questions. A lot of questions have been answered. So go ahead and check in here for anything that you might think. And it might not be super specific to your exact question may not be asked and answered in here, but I'm guessing that there should be enough information in a lot of these that will help you figure out the right answer to your question. And if you don't find it here or in the FAQs from DPHHS or in the federal guidance, then please reach out and see if we can help in any way. So you can see here, there's an example of the general ledger report. And then here's some other, these are the link to the DPHHS FAQs, which is also on that page on our website. And some other resources here, the federal guidance is also listed down here, and it's referenced many times throughout this entire document as well. So there's more information here. Montana Nonprofit Association is helping with reporting and some of the different accounting pieces. So there's a lot of resources there on that page that you should check out. Oops, we don't want to do that one. So let's get into a couple of these questions. So we have been, like I said, taking questions. So thank you to those of you that have submitted questions to help us kind of guide this conversation today. Again, some of these are going to be sort of repeats from our last call if you were on it, but we are getting a lot of the same questions still that we've already covered. So we wanted to just make sure that we touch on some of these high points. Again, as you can see, there's a lot more information in those FAQs that I just showed you. So a pretty big question, what is the period for these funds? You can use these funds going back to March 1st of this year through December 30th. The childcare grant, when you applied for it, maybe specifically said that you could spend funds back to June 1st. And so that's what DPHHS wants you to do. If you can spend all of your grant money from June to December, great. If you get through now and you're like, nope, we still have money that we're going to want to spend, then you can go back to March 1st and use some of this funding to cover those expenses. Again, no double dipping. If you've already used other funds to pay for those expenses, you can't pay for them a second time. Another question we get a lot is if you can make changes to your original budget. And so long as you're covering eligible expenses from March 1st to December 30th, and they are aligning with the scope of your grant, your original intention of the grant, then you are allowed to make changes to your original budget that you submitted. This one comes up a lot too, as far as serving the number of children or the correct amount of the percent of low income kids. And if you're not meeting those goals that you had targeted initially in your applications, you have to give the money back. And not necessarily. So the state asked you initially to estimate your numbers, and as we all know, nothing has gone according to plan this year. So there might be some change in numbers. Maybe your program had to close for a while. Maybe you are able to actually increase your numbers, which would be awesome. So if you are still open and serving children, and able to spend the funds on allowable expenses prior to December 30th, and doing everything you can to serve at least 25% low-income youth, you don't need to return the funds. Can you use funds to reimburse your tuition or fees to families? Absolutely. We would love to see this money going back to families that are using your services, but they cannot be used to prepay fees for a period beyond December 30th. All of your funds must be incurred and spent prior to December 30th. So we've had some questions around, can we give parents a credit for their 2021 tuition or fees? And you cannot do that. You need to cut them a check if you're going to reimburse them. And you can create a receipt that will be your proof of how you gave out those scholarships, the reimbursements, those sorts of things. Can I give my awesome staff a bonus? Like, you guys, I know, have been working so hard, and your staff has been working so hard to meet the needs of families in this crazy time. So potentially it can be justified if you are mitigating or addressing the current COVID-19 situation. Oh, excuse me. There is guidance in the federal, the FAQs from the Treasury Department, and that's where we want to point you to figure out what makes the most sense for the hazard pay, which can be wages or a stipend, I believe. But the definition of hazard pay is additional pay for performing hazardous duty or work. So if you are required to be in person with participants during this time, you are accepting an additional risk. So hazard pay is not something that you can just give because it's a pandemic. It has to be somebody actually performing additional hazardous work. Whew. So for this slide, I broke the rules of PowerPoint slides. There's a lot of words on there. Sorry about that, but these are all really important things, and we have been getting a lot of questions about purchasing a vehicle. So just keep these things in mind. It must be directly justified to mitigate or address COVID-19. Its primary, I think, exclusive purpose really must be for transporting children safely. If you did not initially request the funds to purchase a vehicle, you need to let DPHHS know, and there is the email there that you can contact them at to let them know that you would like to purchase a vehicle. And then also, again, read your contract and see what rules and regulations there might be around your spending. This includes not being able to sell any equipment over $5,000 for at least 12 months after the purchase, unless you get approval from the state. So this is not, the purpose of these funds is not like a money-making piece. So that's what they're saying. This is money that is intended for your program to meet these needs right now. And so a vehicle purchase is going to need really specific justification. Gift cards, are those an eligible expense? And again, maybe you are allowed to purchase gift cards. However, they cannot be spent on alcohol or tobacco. So there has to be some system in place that if you are purchasing gift cards, you cannot use them for those two things. So you have to kind of navigate that, which I know might be a little bit tricky. And what if you don't think you can spend all of your money? That's really okay. As soon as that becomes clear, and we're getting really close now, if you can return your funds to DPHHS, they, up until December 30th, we can reallocate those funds, not we, they can reallocate those funds in this state. And this will not reflect poorly on you. The formula for giving money out was very generous for a lot of programs. And you just might not be able to spend all of the funding. You might not need to. But if you give it back to DPHHS, they can reallocate funding, which I know is happening still. There are still programs that are just finding out that they've been funded. So the sooner you can get funding back if you don't think you can spend it, the more likely that money is to be spent in the state of Montana. We've had a lot of questions around, like, we just got our funding. What on earth are we going to do? There's only a few weeks left to spend it all. Some really great things that people are doing, sending out kits to families with engagement activities and all of the supplies. So that can be enrichment activities, that can be family engagement, that can be any kind of engagement or enrichment activity. There's some programs that are sending out kits with food. So they might have recipes that families can make together. And then that's also addressing food insecurity, as well as getting some of your money spent, making sure that your families are hanging out together and eating good food. Like, I think this is one that I'm really excited about. Some programs just got their funding and started. They're like, all right, let's start this week. We'll do whatever we can, and we're going to run through December 30. They just started a program, made it happen. So you can do that if you get really creative. You can also offer extra services over the holiday break. Students won't be in school towards the end of December, and so go ahead and you could plan some all-day programs. You could plan some evening family events. There's lots of different activities that you could do to go ahead and get that money spent right now. So your final report will be due no later than January 30th. And you don't have to submit receipts, but you do need to keep your receipts. There's a chance with this funding that they will sort of randomly select several grants to monitor to see how the money was spent. So you definitely need to keep copies of your receipts so that you know how you can show how all of your money was spent. And programs that have received $50,000 or more are going to have to submit a general ledger with that final report. And another question that we get a lot is, what the heck is a general ledger? And I'm here to tell you, I am not the person to ask. I apologize. I'm not an accountant, but I will do the best I can to help answer some of those questions. However, I have some good news for you. So the Montana Nonprofit Association is offering still some 30-minute individual help desk support to go over reporting and things like the general ledger. And then Anderson, Zermulin, and Whitfley are offering accounting expertise around these particular funds. And for them, if you need to hire an accountant, those services, if they are incurred and spent prior to December 30th, are expenses you can charge to your grant. And even more exciting news, we are partnering with Anderson Zermulin to give you some specific accounting support around this grant. So we will be hosting a call next Tuesday, and we will have that information to register for that call up on our website, where I just showed you our frequently asked questions and all of the other support information. Oh, I forgot to show you how to sign up for our newsletter. So I'll just tell you. When you go to our website, up on the corner, there is a Join Us tab. And if you click on that, you can fill out information to receive emails from us. So we will email things like the registration for this call. So that will go out later today. So get excited. I'm excited about that. Ooh, look, apparently I made this one fancy and forgot about it. Okay, so I think that's where I am going to kind of turn it over. And initially, Katie and Lori were keeping track of questions as you put them in the chat box. So let's start there and see if there's anything, Katie or Lori, that I need to address here.
Yeah, I've got oh, do you want to jump in, Katie, or do you want me to go?
Go ahead.
Okay, I've got a list, Bethany, that I've been putting together. We've been able to do some answers in the box, but then there's some that I think would just be good for everyone to hear in case they're calling in or just joining the call. So the first was in regards to the $5,000 limit on supplies, whether or not that was cumulative or per item. And Katie actually was able to provide a reply to that and point to it's on page 3 of the frequently asked questions. And the answer, I gotta remember now because I was looking.
It's per item.
Per item, that's right.
5,000 per item.
So then we had another question that was in regards to the reporting in the final report, and I believe this is in regards to the ledger. It was a question from Cindy, wondering whether or not they could take from their database where they're tracking those items, if they can export them into an Excel and then just provide that Excel sheet, or that Excel data
So
to meet that.
Yep. So on the interim report, if you haven't seen the interim report, if you didn't do it, that is also in our frequently asked questions, and the final report is going to look a lot like that. So that's a good place to get some of your final report questions answered as well. But they are accepting a wide range of formats for that general ledger. Excel, I don't think is one of them right now, but if you a CSV file is allowable. So that is how you can upload that. I know I struggled with that. Like I think CSV files, you have to save each tab of your Excel file separately and then upload those separately, but you can do it that way. Yeah. So there's not a real specific format for the general ledger. There's a lot of different ways you can do it.
And this is a related question that just came in. Is the general ledger specific only to grant related purchases, or should they be putting all of their expenses in the general ledger that they report at the end?
That's a really good question that I think maybe we can work on highlighting next Tuesday because I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, and that one came in from Renee. We can also get that into our FAQs so that as we get that answered, even if you're not able to attend that grant webinar, we can make sure that it gets placed into our FAQs. So we will capture that.
Yes, and we're also, sorry, Lori, we're also recording the call next Tuesday. That will be up on our website as well. So if you have questions there, you can see, and you can't make it live to that you can see the recording.
Great. We had a question on whether or not people will be receiving feedback on their interim report. So if they're a grantee that had that funding in time to provide their interim report, will they be getting feedback?
No, and that's also in our FAQs. So if DPHHS has questions, they will contact you, but you won't be getting overall feedback.
Correct. This one I thought would be a good one to invite others to either put into the chat or to, if they wanted to unmute for a second. So when we were talking about gift cards and the need to be able to restrict items that would be purchased with those gift cards so that you can assure that there are no alcohol or tobacco purchases. I wondered if people could share. I know we have heard from programs that have had success getting gift cards that have those restrictions on them. If people could either put into the chat or if they could unmute, if you could share stores or gas stations or places where you've been able to successfully purchase gift cards that you can restrict, that would be helpful for people. Why don't we give that a sec to see if anybody wants to unmute. All right, well, we'll watch the chat for that one. The next question I have was a question in regards to, this was something that came up during the interim reports, I know, I'm not sure that we've been able to finalize this with DPHHS, but people have concerns around the whether or not they need to report student information data when they put their attendance in, so that the way that that was put there. So if you could talk a little bit about how to do attendance in a way that protects students' information that you do not have permission to share, including their name.
Yeah, and that's something that we are working with DPHHS on as well. But the the way I would think about doing it is using initials or numbers or student numbers or something that is identifiable, so you can track individual students that are attending, so you can see that kind of attendance that doesn't necessarily share information that the personally identifiable information. I would come up with some sort of system that makes sense to you. And again, the attendance is one where there's 75 different formats you can submit it in. So you can even take a picture of attendance and submit that. So there's ways, I think, to do it and some flexibility. But come up with a system, I think, that makes sense to you, so that you'll be able to identify the students and then also show DPHHS how many individual students you're serving. Does that make sense?
I see heads nodding.
Oh, good.
The next question is in regards to accounting services and whether or not I think you mentioned it, Bethany, but someone was just confirming if they can use their grant funds to pay for additional accounting services to support the grant.
To support, especially, to support the accounting and the reporting around this grant. Yeah, absolutely. Support services is one of the sort of extra, not the main buckets of funding, but that is an allowable expense.
I think I would just clarify too that people need to both get that accounting support and pay for that accounting support by December 30th. So just to clarify, if you were planning to wait until January and have somebody look at that with you, you would not be able to pay for the services that you receive in January. So if you think you have questions, you'll need to get that support and pay that accounting bill before the end of the grant period.
Yep, thanks. That's a great point.
The next question is just in regards to, like, I have all these other things. Kathy is, new things that she didn't originally plan for, that she's paying for, and is trying to make sure if they fit in the grant, and wondering, should I make a list and send those to DPHHS? How should I figure that out? And what should people do if they're going to purchase those items now, but they're back ordered? Maybe if they're able to pay for them now, but they're not going to receive them until after December.
And that, I think, is okay. That's a really good question, that we can reach out on that one as well, on the back ordered things, because I know I'm running into that as well. As far as changes, I don't think that we've been given any guidance on reporting changes, other than if you submitted an interim report and said you weren't going to be able to spend all of your funding, but now you realize that you will be able to spend it all, that DPHHS needs to know that, and maybe have you update your interim report. But again, the guidance that we have received is that if you are within the scope and the intent of your grant, and you are spending your money on allowable expenses in that allowable time frame, that should be okay.
Another question is just asking, when we're talking about DPHHS, are we referencing licensing, or who are we talking about? I can take that one if that's okay, Bethany.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, so the Department of Health and Human Services obviously is a large department that has several different divisions underneath it, and that includes the childcare licensing division. It is the early education part of division of DPHHS that is managing this grant, but this grant is going to people regardless of whether they're licensed or not. It's going to schools, it's going to organizations in the community, and so the division is really working with people regardless of what kind of organization and whether they're licensed. So we would want you to make sure that if you are a licensed program, that anything you're doing in regards to this particular grant is in is synergistic with the work that you're doing as a licensee and the funds that may be coming in there. So anybody who's receiving other funds, other public funds, needs to be careful not to supplant. We work with those same people, but it doesn't matter whether people are licensed or not licensed for this grant. We have both kinds of entities that are receiving this funding. So it isn't necessarily a licensing person that we're dealing with on this. If you are licensed, you should be talking specifically to them, or you could be getting support from your CCR&R, and they would be able to help you. They're also going to be well versed in helping you look at this grant and how it interacts with your other funding sources. The next question is from Sarah. It's about whether or not they can use their funds to replenish supplies that they've already used, and do a big purchasing of supplies now in order to get that done.
I would think so, but I guess I'm honestly not totally sure. I mean, it's certainly if you need supplies right now, I think you would be fine. But yeah, that's one I may need to find a little bit more information on. It feels like it would be something that would be allowable, but
Yeah.
I'm not totally sure. And I do want to also put the caveat in, I think I did on our last call. Just because Bethany or Lori or somebody tells you that something is an allowable expense doesn't mean that it is. So we're again here to help provide some guidance around that, but ultimately you have to be the one that makes that decision and can provide the justification to the state if they are requesting that, just to be sure. But I think, and that's why we've got all the different guidance listed. And if you comb through that, I think it's a little bit like you're usually able to put together the pieces to figure out what would be the best answer based on questions that are already asked. So that's my like biggest pitch, is to look at the guidance. That one's a little fuzzy. So I don't know. Did you have other thoughts, Lori?
I did. I think it seems pretty allowable, particularly if we're talking about things like cleaning supplies and supplies that you would need in your program. Those are all in regards directly related to mitigating your response to COVID-19 and making sure that people are safe. And just like with something like gift cards, having extra supply on hand that you purchased now, but that you might use into the future is allowable. I mean, that's why gift cards are there. So I don't know why we wouldn't allow the purchase of supplies, particularly that are needed right now. I think you'd be in a pretty clear lane as long as they're directly related to the services and mitigating the risk that everyone is facing right now. I'm going to move us on, just making sure. Thank you guys for some of you have put some really helpful information in regards to how to find the information on Submittable. Just flagging again, if you received your funds later in the general funding cycle, for some of us, for some people, that's just been within the last week or two, or maybe the last month, it is very likely that the department did not ask you to submit an interim report. So you haven't done anything wrong. And to confirm that, you can go into your account on Submittable to see whether or not there's anything outstanding there. And then people have put in some really helpful pieces. Thank you guys for sharing your information around the gift cards. Let's see, someone's asking, okay, just coming back again to the limit and restrictions on the supply purchases. I think we addressed that already. It's on page 3 of our guidance, and it's that $5,000 limit. Let's see. Elaine asked for the email address for DPHHS for questions.
Yeah.
And actually, I'll let you take that, Bethany. I think we're putting people towards Submittable, but it also looks like Katie put in a couple of things.
Yeah, there is an email. Let's see if I can figure out this fancy piece of equipment here. There is an email. No, it doesn't want to go backwards. Sorry. Let's see. It's listed frequently in our FAQs. Let's just go back there since we're here already. So let's find a good spot, because I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's right there. This reliefapps.covid@mt.gov. So there's a couple different places in the FAQs that will specifically say, if you have this question, then reach out at this email address. Does that answer the question?
I think so. We got it. Yep, that's it. We've got it. Thank you there. And just another note on gift cards. There's some questions in regards to gift cards. Are those for families? Are those for employees? It is possible that people could be using those. They are not intended to be just given to families. So what you could be doing some supports for families as a part of the grant that are needed. But the things that we're more likely referring to are, you might do those as a part of bonuses for employees, but more specifically, you might be considering purchases of needs that you would be using in the future for your program. So again, that's why we think about things such as transportation costs and organizations that actually run transportation and might need fuel in the future, that would be allowable. Or if you are feeding kids and you are really considering how you would do that in the future, it's a way of being able to do some of those supplies ahead of time. Let's see, Kathy had a question in regards to her insurance. I think it's a really good question. She had says that DPHHS has said it's okay that she's paid for her van insurance for 12 months ahead of time. There is some fuzzy space there that I think would be helpful to bring to the accounting webinar next week.
Yeah, and the feedback I've gotten from has been that only the March to December months are allowable. But so I don't know. I've seen it sort of differently in different places. So maybe we can track back with that as well.
Let's see, I've seen another question that I just saw. Thank you guys for your patience while I'm trying to make my way through these. But this was in regards to reimbursing tuition and just clarifying that it would only apply to school-aged kids during this. I think this is probably, if we think about some of our folks on the call today who are working with early childhood as well as school-aged programs or school-aged kids.
Yep, absolutely. These expenses are only allowable, or only the expenses that you are spending on your school-aged 5 to 18-year-old children in your care are allowable. So you can't use any of this funding for anyone that's the early ed, anybody younger than school-aged. You cannot use this funding for. So that's a good question for clarification.
And a similar question, different but similar, but somebody had asked about family income data. I think this is in regards to trying to establish whether or not you're serving that 25% threshold of low income families, and whether or not you need to collect family income data in order to do that. If you could talk about that.
Sorry, say that one more time.
So the question of do programs need to
collect data? Okay, so yeah, I think the best answer that I have is that through the application process, they asked you how you are going to ensure that you are serving those students. And so essentially you are setting up the criteria that you need to meet. So I would just say whatever it is that you are doing, whatever it is that you said that you were going to do, and then following the policies that your organization already has in place around those things. That's I think the best guidance that I could give around that. I don't know if you have some other ideas, Lori.
Sorry, I was reading while you were answering.
No, I was reading when you were talking. This is sorry guys. Thanks for coming to our show.
I'm sorry. I trust whatever you did there, and we can also loop back and make sure that we can include that and see if there's any more detail we can get in our FAQ update. One of the questions we have is just, again, get back to the gift cards, wondering if there's a limit on them. I think that in either individually or the number of them, if there's any specific limit that people should think of.
I haven't seen a specific limit, but again, I would sort of comb through the different FAQs to see. I think that one might have been in the federal FAQs. I'll be honest, I've been looking at a lot of different questions, so I'm having a hard time remembering where I saw them all. But yeah, that I don't, to my knowledge, I haven't seen a limit. But yeah, check and see what you can find in there.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think that's one that we'll look and see if we can flag. If we get an answer again, we'll put that in our frequently asked questions. We've taken care of the Tuesday webinar invite. Will be going out later. We just got that confirmed yesterday afternoon, so that should be okay. And then we had a question about whether or not pre-K is included in this grant, like if one of the kids being served is a pre-K youth versus a kindergarten through 12th grade. Yeah, that's a new one for me too.
Yeah, that's when we may have to look and see for sure. My guess would be no, but I don't know.
This is me.
Oh, hey, Karen.
Hi, I am asking that some of our schools in Bozeman do offer pre-K on site, and we have 1 or 2 of those in our little micro school. And I want to be able to count his attendance, but we'll investigate and see.
Okay, yep, and we can,
because he's 4 years and 9 months old.
Yeah, and you know, pre-K, I think, you know, we will drill in and get a question of that, but I'll just riff a little bit on my thought off the top of my head, which is that given that the focus of this fund is on families in particular who, with schools not meeting full time or offering in-person instruction for that time, and the disruption in all of that, that they were trying to address that need. Pre-K, not a required, you know, is not required in the state of Montana, is not funded in all communities. And so it feels like it's in a little bit of that gray area, but given that that is your school district and a part of their programming, it seems a relevant question. So we'll definitely reach out to DPHHS and see if we can get an answer. Let's see. I see some of your new questions coming in here. People are give some of their own thoughts on that. Thank you guys for chiming in. And then an indication of whether or not there's more funding coming in the new year. So we can just take I can take that if you want, Bethany.
Sure.
Quick flag, there's a couple of different, you know, moving parts here. Obviously, this is federal funding that the Congress approved, sent to states. States then were responsible to, within the larger guidelines of the CARES Act funding, to get out to their communities and people across the state. And they had a lot of flexibility around the different kinds of things. So not every state has a school age grant. We are really fortunate to have received that. So in order for there to be new funding like this, first it would require the federal government to approve that funding. And that could come in different ways, a couple different ways. It could come in funding like this that is flexible to states, and then they have within that flexibility, they can design their own responses. It could also come through some more specific funds. So there have been some pieces of legislation at the federal level that are specific to 21st century funding that could expand 21st century funding. It's the only dedicated public funding that we have in our state, or the 21st century grants that come from the U.S. Department of Education. They go to OPI, they're put out through a competitive grant making process in 5-year grants. It's possible that we could see some expansion there, but that we won't know until that gets passed, if that gets passed. And then the other way it could come is that in that more broad way. And if it does come into the state, if there's additional funding that comes to the state, then our work would be directly with state government, particularly through the governor's office, to really help lift up the needs of care across the state. And then it would be at their discretion to work with state government to design something like this again to get out to people. So right now, all of those are question marks. And part of what we do at MTAA is try to, both at the federal level and at the state level, just lift up, the good work that you are all doing across the state, help people understand that and understand what those needs are, and just really try to advocate on your behalf to secure whatever resources can support you and the kids and families that you're working with. Any other, let's see. I see a question here in regards to electricity, internet costs, and whether they're allowable for childcare to run out of their home, if those are an allowable expense with this funding.
I think I would have to double check on that. What I've typically been telling people, this is a little bit harder for me to answer because our experience is not with in-home childcare. So again, it's sort of an accounting piece that I don't necessarily understand. From my perspective, whatever your typical business expenses are, like however you account for those, I think would be considered allowable, but again, it's up to what your specific policies are in place already. But
I
we
would say
can get,
Yeah, and I would just offer for childcare providers, that's a great question for your CCR&R, and we can work with them as well to see if they've got any, if they've been able to drill down on that guidance as well as working with DPHHS.
perfect. I'm sort of looking at chat to just see if I'm caught up, but oh, it said I had 24 new messages, but I think I got it. Okay, so Lori, do you have any other questions or?
I think that hit all of the ones that I was able to capture out of the chat box.
Okay.
But I'm just doing a,
Does anybody else have any questions that you want to throw out there? We've got a few minutes left and you can either drop them in the chat or we can take turns unmuting and throw something out there if you have any other questions. What if an expense we thought was allowable is later deemed not so? I think, I mean, I guess, again, kind of going back to the idea that this is something that you need to read through the guidance and kind of make these decisions yourself. Sorry, I need to adjust. So I think that the best advice I can give is that as you're making any of these purchases or any of these expenses, really think about that ahead of time and then be ready to pay it back. I mean, cover it with other funds if you need to. That's really about all you can do. Oh, thanks for all the nice things everyone's saying. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm not sure if you guys can hear me now.
Now I can. I was just too busy talking.
Bethany? No worries. I believe we received guidance from the state that it was okay to credit summer programmers participants. So if someone participated in our summer program and paid, we're going to credit them and just call it that. And that's an expense that we incurred before December 30th, and they now have credit on their account. They can opt to get a refund if they should like, but from my understanding from the state, that is an acceptable way. You can incur, because I think it's a way to incur that expense and support people going forward.
My understanding in all of the guidance that I have received is that you cannot use a credit unless that credit is spent before December 30. So like, I don't think you might be able to credit them for the summer program to then use that credit for your school time program, but the credit can't carry beyond December 30th.
Okay.
But another thing,
I'll think a little more.
Okay, and another thing, another way that I think it might help to look at some of that about how you're crediting and where the money is going to end up. I really believe in the goodness of people personally, and if you give $600 back to a family that paid for this school year, I just feel like there's a good chance that come January they're gonna give you that $600 back to make sure that their kid has a place to be. So that's another way of looking at it, I think.
I totally agree, and I just want to make sure that I'm interpreting right, because I got an email from the state saying that the way we proposed was okay.
Okay.
And so I thought maybe I'd check in with you. So I'll check in a little bit more. to just make sure, so we don't end up.
Yeah, yep, absolutely.
In the rift.
And that'd be great, Ryan. And again, yeah, we're all figuring this out together, really, truly. I think even at the state office as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You bet. Let's see, anybody else?
Sorry, I was just following up. This is Renee. I think I understand this correctly. We could do reimbursements for summer programming, correct? Because
Yep.
it's June 1 on, okay. And just straight up issue a check to the family.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
that's a great use of these funds. Especially if you get to a point where you have paid for all of your programs and you're like, I don't know what else to do with this money, but you have back to March 1st tuition or program fees that you can reimburse to families. That's absolutely a great expense. Any one last question in our last minute or two here?
There was a question about if the guidance specifically addressed gift cards.
I guess I don't know for sure how specifically. We do have guidance up as far that we don't have guidance up on our website yet on our FAQs. I realized that the other day, so I will add that question in. But really what I'm mostly going to be doing is pulling the guidance out from the other FAQs that we have access to. So the guidance that I have is specifically around no purchasing of alcohol and tobacco. I don't know if there's a whole lot else in there, guidance around gift cards.
I have a question regarding scholarships to families. If you gave a family a scholarship to attend the program for free, does that just go into the general operating budget for the program?
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
And then does that money have to be depleted? Does that money from the scholarships have to be depleted and recorded by the end of the year? Or is that just covering general operating costs? I'm confused on how that is recorded.
The scholarship piece is confusing, and that is something that Anderson Zermulin will be covering in the call next week, but I can give you my best interpretation, and that is scholarships. If you look at your accounting, and again, I'm not an accountant, but this is how I look at it. You have your incomes and you have income and you have expenses. And so a scholarship is going to be income. And so the way that you would record that to this grant is as an expense out on how you're spending it. So it's not, so you're going to record the grant as income to your program. And then all of your expenses are going to go out. So it won't look like a scholarship expense, but it'll be a grant expense where, let's say you were, if you gave a 50% scholarship on a $600 fee, you would pay all your same expenses, except instead of $600 coming from a parent to pay those expenses, you have $300 from a parent and $300 from the grant. Does that help?
Yeah, but nobody's ever going to look at our budget. They're just going to look at how the money was spent from the grant itself. So it's just going to look like, you know, a line for scholarships in the grant.
That'll be an income. Yeah, it'll be an income, and that should all be in the general ledger or in the final reporting. How you have your income and then how you have your expenses going out. That should be in there. So a scholarship wouldn't be a line item as an expense. I don't think.
Can I ask a quick question? I think I might have missed.
Sure.
I thought that the grant was for 5 and up. Do they need to be in school, or is it for children 5 and up? Like, there are pre-K children who are 5?
we might need to get some clarification on that, because I know we talked about like the pre-K as part of the school system and they're not quite 5. So I
Yeah,
think it's
there's not-
opposite.
Sorry,
Sorry.
there, it is for children 5 and up, but I had some people in the beginning give me the guidance that it's for children 5 and up. And then I didn't think about the fact that they're not in school.
Not
They're
in school.
program, but they are 5 because some kids don't start school till 6. So,
Right. So I think that's something that we need to get some clarification on.
okay.
Bethany, I might just loop back to that question in regards to scholarships, because I feel like
Please.
we kind of talk around that a lot and it gets confusing. I think the way that some people are thinking about scholarships is, thinking about it as an expense. Like as Bethany said, a scholarship is not technically an expense. The expense that you incur is your payroll, your rent, the items that are required to be able to run your program. Those are your expenses. And scholarships are really, if you think about it, they're really more just a reduction in revenue or a different way of thinking about your revenue, but they are not themselves expenses. You didn't put money out to do something other than the money that you spent to actually run your program and provide the services that you're providing. So I think a lot of people have thought like we got this money in, we're offering these scholarships. There are lots of programs that don't charge fees or charge very minimal fees. Scholarships are really just another way of thinking about where your revenue comes from, which is not an expense for the purposes of this grant. And I thought that might just be a little bit more helpful piece to include there.
Thanks, Lori. And I know that is one of the things that they'll be covering on that call next Tuesday. So hopefully we can get a little bit clearer guidance on that as well. So I think that's it for now. I just would say again, like, please visit our website, look at all of those frequently asked questions. I know it's a lot, but that's kind of the deal when you sign up for one of these grants, is understanding how you can spend the funding. So take some time, get familiar with those FAQs, look in there and see if there's, like I said, there's a lot of information in there that should be really helpful to you. And if you can't find what you're needing there, do feel free to reach out to us as well. Let me put this one. Oh, just kidding. We're having some technical difficulties here today. I'm going to go ahead and put this one slide back up so you guys can see contact information if you need it. So maybe, there you go. So yes, we'll put that, we'll send out an email with registration for the next call next week. And then we will also, you can also get that through our newsletter this later today. And again, just thank you guys all for coming. We really appreciate you being here, and thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing for the youth in Montana. That it's really amazing what you guys are all doing. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week.